The most powerful entity of the 21st century may not have a flag. It may not have an army. It may not even have a capital city. Yet it could influence billions of people, move trillions of dollars, shape political decisions, and control critical infrastructure across continents. For centuries, nations were the ultimate centers of power. But what happens when organizations become wealthier than countries? Technology platforms connect more people than governments, and digital networks operate beyond national borders. The next superpower may not be a country at all. And if that future is already beginning, it could change everything we think we know about power itself.
For most of human history, power was tied to territory. The largest armies controlled the largest empires. Wealth came from land, resources, taxation, and conquest. From ancient Rome to imperial Britain, political power and economic power were deeply connected. A state could command soldiers, collect taxes, enforce laws, and project influence beyond its borders. Geography defined strength. The rise of nation-states transformed the world, but preserved the same principle. Whether it was France, Britain, the Soviet Union, or the United States, global leadership belonged to countries capable of concentrating military, economic, and political power. The 20th century became a competition between superpowers. The United States and the Soviet Union spent decades competing for influence across every continent. Their rivalry shaped global trade, technological development, military alliances, and international institutions. When the Cold War ended, many believed the nation-state had firmly secured its position as the dominant actor in world affairs. But another transformation was quietly underway. The internet was shrinking distances. Globalization was connecting markets. Capital was becoming increasingly mobile, and information was beginning to move faster than governments could control. The foundations of a new power structure were emerging, one built not on territory, but on networks, not on borders, but on connectivity, not on geography, but on data. The first major turning point arrived with globalization. Beginning in the late 20th century, multinational corporations expanded across borders at unprecedented speed. A company could design products in one country, manufacture them in another, source materials from dozens more, and sell globally. Scale became extraordinary. Some corporations generated annual revenues larger than the GDP of entire nations. Their decisions affected employment, investment, infrastructure, and trade across multiple continents simultaneously. Unlike governments, these organizations could adapt rapidly. They could move capital, shift operations, and restructure supply chains without needing elections or parliamentary approval. Economic influence was becoming increasingly detached from geography. The second turning point came with the digital revolution. For the first time in history, organizations could reach billions of people directly. Search engines became gateways to information. Social media platforms became public squares. Cloud computing became essential infrastructure. Digital ecosystems expanded beyond national boundaries. A user in Brazil, India, Germany, or South Africa could rely on the same platform every day. Governments still possessed legal authority, but digital networks increasingly shaped how people communicated, consumed information, conducted business, and interacted with the world. Power was becoming decentralized from states and centralized within platforms. The third turning point emerged through data. Oil was once called the most valuable resource in the world. Data gradually became a competitor. Every search, purchase, click, message, location, and interaction generated information. Organizations capable of collecting and analyzing this data gained unprecedented advantages. They could predict behavior, optimize services, improve algorithms, expand influence, and strengthen their position further. Data created feedback loops.
The more users a platform attracted, the more data it gathered. The more data it gathered, the better its services became. The better its services became, the more users it attracted. The cycle reinforced itself. Network effects created immense concentrations of power. The fourth turning point arrived through artificial intelligence. For decades, computing amplified human productivity. Artificial intelligence introduced the possibility of automating increasingly complex tasks. The organizations controlling advanced computing infrastructure, massive data sets, and artificial intelligence development gained strategic importance. Artificial intelligence was no longer merely a technological tool. It was becoming an economic force, a geopolitical asset, a competitive advantage, and potentially a foundation for future power. At the same time, global supply chains became increasingly dependent on a small number of companies and networks. Semiconductors, cloud infrastructure, digital payments, logistics systems, telecommunications. Modern civilization relied on interconnected systems managed by a relatively limited number of actors. These networks did not replace governments, but they became indispensable to them. And that dependence introduced a profound shift. Power was no longer concentrated exclusively within states. It was increasingly shared with organizations operating above, across, and between national borders.
To understand why the next superpower may not be a country, we first need to understand how power itself has evolved. Historically, power depended on controlling territory. Empires needed land. Nations needed borders. Governments needed physical infrastructure. But the digital age changed the relationship between power and geography. Today, influence often comes from controlling networks. The most valuable asset is not necessarily territory, it is connectivity. A country can lose access to an important trade route and suffer economic consequences. But a platform that connects billions of people can influence communication across the entire planet simultaneously. This is a fundamentally different form of power. It does not require conquest. It does not require occupation. It does not require armies stationed abroad. It operates through dependence. The more individuals, businesses, and governments rely on a system, the more influential the owner of that system becomes. This is the logic behind network power. Consider electricity. A power grid becomes more important as more communities depend on it. The same principle applies to digital infrastructure. Cloud providers support governments, hospitals, banks, corporations, universities, and military contractors. Payment networks facilitate commerce across borders. Communication platforms connect billions of users. Search engines organize access to information. As dependence increases, influence expands. The owners of these systems gain leverage not through force, but through necessity. And necessity can be one of the strongest forms of power ever created. Another mechanism is scale. Traditional governments face limitations. Political systems move slowly. Policies require approval. Budgets require negotiation. Laws require enforcement. Large organizations often move much faster. Technology companies can deploy software updates globally within hours. Financial institutions can move capital instantly. Digital platforms can reach billions without crossing a single border. Scale no longer requires territorial expansion. It requires network expansion. This distinction is critical because it changes how influence spreads. In previous centuries, power grew by acquiring land. In the 21st century, power increasingly grows by acquiring users. The result is a new type of empire. Not an empire of territory, an empire of participation. People voluntarily join these networks because they provide value. Yet the cumulative effect can be similar. Dependence grows, alternatives shrink, influence expands. Another mechanism is data. For centuries, governments gathered information through censuses, taxation records, and administrative systems. Today, some private organizations collect far more detailed information about human behavior than any historical government could have imagined. Consumer preferences, travel patterns, communication habits, economic activity, behavioral trends. The value of this information is enormous. Data improves decision-making. Data improves products. Data improves prediction, and prediction creates power. Organizations capable of predicting behavior gain advantages that extend far beyond economics. They can shape markets, anticipate trends, optimize systems, influence attention. The future increasingly belongs to those who understand information flows, and information flows through networks. Artificial intelligence amplifies these dynamics. AI systems require computing power, data, infrastructure, and talent. The organizations controlling these resources gain strategic advantages. Just as industrial power depended on factories and energy, future power may depend on algorithms and computing infrastructure. The comparison is not perfect, but the pattern is familiar. Every major technological revolution creates new centers of power. The Industrial Revolution elevated industrial nations. The Information Revolution elevated digital networks. The AI revolution may elevate those who control intelligence infrastructure itself. And that raises an important question. If power increasingly depends on networks, data, and AI, what role will countries play? The answer is not that countries disappear, far from it. Governments still control laws, military forces, taxation, and regulation. States remain enormously powerful, but they increasingly share the stage with organizations whose influence transcend national boundaries. The future may not be defined by governments versus corporations. It may be defined by their interaction, competition, partnership, dependency, conflict, cooperation. The lines separating public and private power are becoming increasingly blurred. Evidence of this shift is already visible. Technology platforms influence elections, public discourse, and information flows. Cloud infrastructure supports essential services across entire economies. Digital payment networks process trillions of dollars in transactions. Semiconductor manufacturers affect global supply chains. Artificial intelligence firms are becoming strategic assets in international competition. Governments increasingly recognize this reality. Around the world, policymakers are debating technology regulation, data sovereignty, AI governance, cybersecurity, and digital infrastructure. These debates are not merely technological, they are geopolitical, because whoever controls critical systems influences the future. At the same time, citizens are becoming participants in multiple overlapping power structures. A person may live under one government while relying daily on services operated by organizations headquartered thousands of miles away. Communication, commerce, navigation, entertainment, work, education, finance. Much of modern life flows through networks that transcend borders. This creates opportunities. Innovation spreads faster. Knowledge becomes more accessible. Global collaboration becomes easier. But it also creates new vulnerabilities. Cyber attacks can disrupt entire industries. Platform decisions can affect millions overnight. Infrastructure failures can ripple across continents. Interdependence creates both strength and risk. Artificial intelligence may accelerate these trends even further. Advanced AI systems could become essential infrastructure for research, healthcare, logistics, finance, manufacturing, and government operations. The organizations building and operating these systems may gain influence comparable to some of the most powerful institutions in history, not because they seek political control,
but because others become dependent on what they provide. And dependence creates leverage. The next superpower may emerge not from military conquest or territorial expansion, but from becoming indispensable to the functioning of modern civilization.
For centuries, humanity measured power through borders. We looked at maps, counted armies, measured territory, compared economies, and those metrics still matter. But the 21st century is introducing a different reality. Power increasingly flows through networks, through infrastructure, through information, through systems that connect billions of people across continents. The most influential institutions of the future may not govern nations, they may govern platforms. They may not issue passports, but they may shape communication. They may not collect taxes, but they may control critical infrastructure. They may not command armies, but they may influence the systems upon which armies depend. The real story is not that countries are becoming irrelevant, it is that power itself is evolving. Every era creates its own dominant institutions. Empires defined one age, nation-states defined another. Networks may define the next. The question is not whether this transformation is happening. In many ways, it already is. The question is who will shape it. Will future power remain accountable to democratic institutions? Will governments successfully adapt? Will global networks create greater prosperity and cooperation? Or will they concentrate influence in ways humanity has never experienced before? Perhaps the next superpower will not have a flag. Perhaps it will not have a capital. Perhaps it will not even appear on a map. But it may shape your future just as profoundly as any empire in history. And that leaves us with a question worth thinking about. If power is moving away from borders and toward networks, who do you think will hold the most influence in the next 50 years? Countries, corporations, or something entirely new? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping power, economics, technology, and geopolitics, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Because understanding the future begins with understanding how power changes.